Section 11 of The Sandman, His Farm Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mark Dykeshorn. The Sandman, His Farm Stories by William John Hopkins. The Rail Fence Story. Once upon a time there was a farmhouse, and it was painted white and had green blinds, and it stood not far from the road. In the fence was a wide gate to let the wagons through to the barn, and the wagons, going through, had made a track that led up past the kitchen door, and past the shed, and past the barn, and past the orchard to the wheat field, and through the wheat field to the maple sugar woods. All about were other fields, and one of them was a great enormous field where Uncle John used to let the horses and cows go to eat the grass, after he had got the hay in. This field was so big that Uncle John thought it would be better if it was made into two fields. He couldn't put a stone wall across it, because all the stones in the field had been made into a wall that went around the outside, so he thought an easy way would be to put a rail fence across. So, one day, when it was winter and snow was on the ground, Uncle John and Uncle Solomon took their axes and walked along the little track, past the barn and past the orchard, and climbed over the bars into the wheat field. Then they walked across the wheat field and climbed over the bars into the maple sugar woods, and they walked along the road in the woods until they came to a place where were some trees that were just the right size to make rails and posts. They were not maple sugar trees, but a different kind. Then they cut down enough of these trees to make all the rails and all the posts they wanted, and they cut off all the branches, and they cut some of the trees into logs that were just long enough for rails, and they cut the other trees into logs that were just long enough for posts. Then they took the rail logs, and with their axes they split each one all along from one end to the other until it was in 6 pieces. Each piece was a rail, but the post logs they didn't split. Then they left the logs and the rails lying there and walked back, and climbed over into the wheat field, and went across the wheat field and climbed over at the other side, and walked past the orchard, and past the barn, and past the shed, and went in at the kitchen door. The next morning Uncle John got out the old oxen, and they put their heads down low, and he put the yoke over and the boughs under, and hooked the tongue of the sled to the yoke. Then he said, "Gee up there!" and they started walking slowly along, past the barn and past the orchard to the wheat field. And Uncle John took down the bars, and they walked across the wheat field, and he took down the bars at the other side. Then the old oxen walked through the gate and along the road to the place where the post logs and the rails were, and Uncle Solomon had come too, and Little John. But they didn't let Little John come when they cut the trees down, because they were afraid he might get hurt. Then Uncle Solomon and Uncle John piled the rails on the sled and the post logs on top, and the old oxen started and walked along the road and through into the wheat field and across the field, and Uncle John put the bars up after the oxen had gone through the gates. Then they dragged the sled along past the orchard and past the barn to the shed. There they stopped, and Uncle John and Uncle Solomon took off the logs and the rails. The rails were piled up under the shed to dry, but the logs they had to make square, and holes had to be bored in them before they would be posts. Then Uncle John unhooked the tongue of the sled from the yoke and took off the yoke, and the old oxen went into the barn. The next day Uncle John took an axe that was a queer shape, and he made the post logs square. Then he bored the holes in the logs for the rails to go in, and piled the posts up under the shed. They were all ready to set into the ground, but the ground was frozen hard, and they couldn't be set until the winter was over and the ground was soft. After the winter was over and it was getting warm, the ground melted out and got soft. Then Uncle John and Uncle Solomon took a crowbar, a great heavy iron bar with a sharp end, and a shovel, and they went to the great enormous field. Then they saw where they wanted the fence to be, and they dug a lot of holes in the ground, all in a row to put the posts in. Then they went back, and Uncle John got out the oxen and put the yoke over and the boughs under, and hooked the tongue of the cart to the yoke. On the cart they piled the posts, and there were so many they had to come back for another load. Then the oxen started and walked down the little track and out through the wide gate into the road. and along the road to the great enormous field where the holes were all dug for the posts. Then Uncle Solomon and Uncle John put the posts in the holes and pounded the dirt down hard. Then the oxen walked back along the road to the farmhouse and in at the gate and up to the shed. And Uncle John put the rails on the cart, and the oxen walked back to the field again and in beside the row of posts. And Uncle John took the rails off the cart and put them in the holes in the posts, so that they went across from one post to the next. And in each post were 4 holes, and 4 rails went across. Then the oxen went a little farther, and the rails were put in between the next posts, and so on until the rails reached all the way across the field, and the fence was done. And when Uncle John wanted the cows or the horses to go through, he could take down the rails at any part of the fence. Then the old oxen started walking back out of the field into the road and along the road to the farmhouse. And they went in at the wide gate and up the track past the kitchen door to the shed, and there they stopped. And Uncle John unhooked the tongue of the cart from the yoke and put the cart in the shed. And he took off the yoke, and the old oxen went into the barn and went to sleep. And that's all. End of section 11.